All right, we're here
Oh,
for
heck.
part 2 of episode 36. I don't know how well start and stop works, I guess, but I figured it out. Anyways, yeah, if you want to catch part 1, it's on Spotify, it's on YouTube, not that hard to find. But now we get into our second check-in of the 24-25 season with our good friend Jeff Mlinar from Empire State Takeover. Good sir, how are you feeling after a week of travels?
Well, I'm all right. A little tired. Not gonna lie, little tired. This in my 30s isn't quite the same as this in my 20s. I'm
How
still
was
trying to recover from the weekend.
what exactly was your snow experience from the weekend?
Um, More so that I didn't. I don't know. I rookie mistake. I guess I didn't look at the forecast, or nobody did. I don't know. But Saturday, I had a full section 4 Saturday. Left home in the morning, went to Delaware Academy in Delhi, which we may discuss a little bit as this goes on because there was a Section 2 team that was involved.
Mm-hmm.
So went there, 2 games, drove out to Elmira. From there was a day-long thing at Elmira College that Thad Phillips, the women's coach, did a tremendous job in organizing for the second straight year. It was 5 games over the course of the day. I missed the early slot just because of time conflicts, but got there for the last couple, those were kind of the headliners of the day. But then it got fun. By the time I got out of Elmira, it was, last game probably got done at 9:30, 9:45. Hung out, talked for a little while, fill up the gas tank. By the time I'm heading out, it's 10:30. Didn't realize it was going to snow. It just didn't look. I thought we were in the clear after the midweek, late week, that all that sort of stuff. From just east of Binghamton going up 88, it was snowy. It was the wet snow variety. I think we got a little bit here too. But it was, the wet snow variety that doesn't just easily get plowed away. And late Saturday night, and I don't know if the DOTs out there realized that the snow was going to be quite what it was out there, because I mean, I didn't. I maybe saw one plow in about 60 miles, and I don't drive vehicles that are tremendous when there's 2.5, 3 inches of snow that's just very lightly traffic plowed at best. So yeah, Saturday night turned into pulling off in the Oneonta Walmart parking lot and taking a nap for a couple hours, just waiting for a couple plows that hit that road. So that was yeah, it's happened before. It'll happen again. It's happened on 88 before. It's happened on 88 before this calendar year. But yeah, that was the first part of the weekend, and then just turn around and drive down to Poughkeepsie the next morning for 2 more games. So yeah, it was just an enjoyable little travel. But it's upstate New York in the winter. It's what we do.
Yeah, next time we'll all read the forecast. How about that?
Yeah, and I'm okay. We're due for a bad winter, but I would like for it to not happen for the next 50 years. But
Wishful thinking, 50 years. Wishful thinking.
yeah, I think we're on track for one this year.
All right, let's just dive into before we get really deep into everything else that happened around Section 2. Let's just let me get into what were your travels last week. I know you were still when we talked last Monday, um, you basically said your back half was pretty locked in, which we'll get to in a minute. On your front end, you were kind of playing it by the seat of your pants a little bit. You end up going to Cobleskill, Richmond, and catching a look at the Bulldogs between the Riverhawks of Coxsackie Athens, who, if you call part one, good on you. We had Regan Helen and Bailey Brisky as our guests in part one of this episode. And you got a nice introduction into what the Riverhawks could be looking like this year.
Yes, it's a potential based team. I think they have a good amount of upside, and we discussed them a little bit last week when we were talking about the Class B outlook and how wide open it could be. They have replacing to do from last year as they graduated 1,000-point scorer that's playing at Sage now, and Riley Sitzer. But Reagan Helen is one of probably the 2 or 3 most improved players in Section 2 from the end of last season to the beginning of this season. So you couple that with Bailey Brisky, who is, probably, as far as I can think, as gifted and as talented of a player as there is in the Patroon, and probably the most naturally gifted basketball athlete in Class B in the area. You have those two. That's a good starting point, and then build around there. Cobleskill played zone. Reagan got hot. 5 threes in about 6.5 minutes of that first half. Kind of helped break it open a little bit. It wasn't even so much because I think Coxsackie once they really get into the thick of things and some challenging games, which I know they have a big one coming up this week. This is a team that seems kind of pace and style oriented. Like, they have athletes. They're going to want to get up and down. I think they're better in transition in the open floor than in the half court. You get Bailey out in the open floor, you get Reagan out in the open floor, spacing the court. That game wasn't even so much that until the third quarter. They were able to. They created turnovers in the first half, but it wasn't a whole lot of transition. They're able to do it in the third quarter. They got out, got some more runouts, got on the open floor a little bit more. But yeah, I mean that's they're a dangerous team. They might have a relatively wide ceiling to floor gap. They might have. I don't think that they're immune from maybe a couple games this year that are duds. Depending on matchups and like if they're not able to control the style of play, but they get it their way. They're as dangerous as anybody in the area in Class B, and definitely in the foothills as well, or not the foothills. Pardon me, the Patroon.
And then on Tuesday night, you stayed local as well, and you end up going up to the Spa City. Went up to Saratoga, check out what is now no longer a conference matchup, as Troy has moved into the Colonial starting this year on the girls basketball side, but they kept it as a non-league matchup on their schedules. And Troy, a very young Troy team, but talented in that, still in that regard, ends up taking care of business and wins at Saratoga. And if I remember correctly, I think this is the first time Troy beats Saratoga in something like 20 years, roughly. Did I get that right?
Really?
That's
That much I don't know. That would surprise me a little bit. If they played each other, say, a decade ago, given like the Kiana Patterson, Mary Patterson time frames. I don't know if they played each other at that point because, back then we're still talking like the Big Ten was the thing. So that could, I mean, it could be possible. Because Toga's had some kids over the last. That's a big thing with Saratoga. They've had 6 graduation classes with 6 kids that either went on to play Division I basketball or technically probably could have went on to play Division I basketball, because Carrie Flaherty started at Holy Cross. Now she's an impact player at Catholic University, one of the top D3s in the country. Dolly Cairns, one of the top players this area has seen in my time doing this. Abby Ray at Albany, Tosh Chudy at Lafayette, Lauren Patnode, who right now is unfortunately injured, but at LaSalle, and then Carly Wise. Like, if Carly Wise decided at the beginning of her high school playing days that she wanted basketball to be her thing, she's a Division I athlete, and she probably would have been a low to mid Division I basketball player if that was the development path that she chose. But Clemson lacrosse ain't half bad. So, I think Clemson, right? Clemson lacrosse ain't half bad. So that's 6 players over the course of 6 years that were big time kids. They're all gone. So it is a rebuild through the youth for them. And even with Troy is a rebuild through the youth as well, but they're a year further in that rebuild. Even though they're young, some of what their impact kids are, it's their second year. Like Amaya Harris might be in 8th grade, but it's her second year with this kind of role. And some of these other kids, it's their second year in this kind of role. So, I mean, it was very early season, not crisp for a while, sort of like you expect in early December, and then you expect it even more when it's youth in early December. But Troy turned up the pressure in the second half, turned Saratoga over, which will probably be, I saw Toga again on Sunday. That's going to be a big thing for them this year, as far as progress over the course of the year, limiting empty possessions, limiting by way of turnovers. But coughed it up a lot in the second half, and Troy got more meaningful paint touches and kind of flipped the script in that game. Really, really young game between those two teams, and that was my biggest takeaway. From a numbers standpoint, between Troy and Toga, which we're not talking C's and D's, we're talking AA and AAA schools, large schools. 5 8th graders saw first quarter minutes. I think 3 of them started, but 5 8th graders between the two teams saw actual legitimate minutes in the first quarter. 3 for Saratoga, 2 for Troy. That number 5 was higher than the total amount of rostered juniors and seniors combined. I think the two teams have a total of 4 juniors and seniors combined. Toga might have 3, Troy 1. And 4 upperclassmen just total on the rosters, and 5 8th graders saw minutes in the first quarter. There's no way to quantify that and go back and, have I ever seen something like that before? I don't ever remember seeing quite that in a large school, public school basketball game. It might be a little bit different where you think about like Catholic Central 3 years ago when they were building through the youth and they have 7th and 8th grade, and Aquinas and Rochester has kind of done the same thing. But, with a large school, public school, I don't think I've ever seen that. Super, super young. JV age. It was a JV aged game for the most part.
Okay. Now Wednesday, you ended up going out west to Central New York area, which I know is outside Section 2, but the one of the two teams involved in the game you saw was the defending state champions out of Class A from Section 3, Utica Notre Dame, who will be in town as part of the Amsterdam Holiday College Showcase the weekend after Christmas. It's become a pretty regular tradition for the Jugglers to come out here and compete against some worthy talent. I know day one they'll play Greenwich, which will be crazy entertaining if you ask me. I mean, talking Kuzmik, Autiello, the Wolf sisters facing off against the two Trinkus girls. And then Utica Notre Dame will also be playing a school out of PSAL that Saturday, Queens Metropolitan. But you got to see the Jugglers in person. They wound up winning that game at New Hartford. What was your takeaway from Utica Notre Dame? And did it kind of feel like same song, second verse as far as, you know, the returning talent from last year and what they're able to do so far this year?
Maybe the biggest takeaway from just first for the record, that was the best game I saw this week. That was the most entertaining game I saw this week. It was that and one other were probably the two highest level games that I watched this week. But that one, if I could take one game from what I watched over the dozen or so that I saw last week and just bring it forward to the rest of the winter, the Notre Dame New Hartford game, that was the most entertaining one of the week. It'll probably be one of the more entertaining ones I see this year. A big takeaway locally in particular for them, I know it's outside the confines of Section 2, but they are now the benchmark. They are now the one that's going to get everybody's best shot in their area. They are now the one that everybody gets keyed up for. They are now the one that when they're on the road and they're playing a team that's even feels like they could be moderately competitive with them, the crowd shows up. The student section shows up. So they're going to get everyone's haymaker. And this was probably the first time, early in the season, I think their second game of the year, but it was the first time that they got to experience someone's haymaker. I think they got that from New Hartford. New Hartford, I thought New Hartford played particularly well. I didn't think Notre Dame didn't play bad, but I don't think they played great. And they got pushed. They got tested. It was double-digit. Notre Dame had a double-digit lead. New Hartford came back on them, tied it up a few times in the second half. New Hartford played with great energy. They also had just kind of like the luck of the draw sometimes. They had some serendipitous bounces, fortuitous bounces, a couple like back-to-back possessions with bank threes and that sort of thing they can potentially be deflators, especially second bank three, second possession in a row with a bank three with a shot clock going down. High schoolers, that can be one that you look up and your shoulders kind of go down. You become Eeyore, like, oh, this isn't our day, and you're on the road. But they continue to respond. There was New Hartford is also a young team. They have a couple seniors that have been around for a while, but what's making them competitive right now, it's allowing them to take the next step into being, kind of a contender in Class A in Section 3 is their youth. They've got a group of freshmen, 8th grade guards that play with great energy. They play with confidence. Like they don't play like they don't play with sheepishness of young kid at the varsity level. They play like they belong. They play free, no pressure, and they're kind of, they could potentially be that next one in the Utica area, and those kids are kind of leaders of that next wave. So it was probably productive for both teams where New Hartford had their flashes where it's like, hey, we can run with these guys. but Notre Dame felt that, and winner's response, right? Kind of like championship medal with responding to those blows, going on little runs. And it was, you brought up the two Trinkuses. It was Aaron Trinkus that I thought really was the backbreaker, because Ella's going to be Ella. That's a 6'1" junior, kind of does it all. Consistently stays engaged in a basketball game, doesn't take plays off, her mind doesn't wander. So when you have a future Division I player in a high school basketball game, especially in upstate New York at this level, they have, if they stay consistently engaged, and if they stay around and try to be involved and don't take possessions off, there's, even if you don't play that well, there's 25 points to be had. There's double-digit rebounds to be had. There's defensive impact to be had. That's not a game that I think Ella's going to remember. Like, oh, I'd like to do that one over. And I still think she had 29 and 12. But it was Aaron Trinkus that really hit the backbreakers. Like, Ella's going to do Ella. You got to try and do what you can to bottle up everybody else. And Aaron had maybe 23 and 10, but just big time fourth quarter shots. Tied up at 57. New Hartford had a three that rattled out. Notre Dame gets a defensive rebound. Ella gets it kicked back to like a 24-foot trail three from Aaron with 2-3 minutes left. And that was kind of the momentum shift of the game. But yeah, Notre Dame up an A after winning the B title last year, but I still think, I know they graduated Maggie Trinkus, who just had a career game at Mount St. Mary over the weekend. I know they graduated some depth guard pieces. They have some younger guards in the mix now. They've got a freshman, Lily Johnson, that's their starting point. They start two freshmen, her and Jules Otis, but they move up to Class A. They're still, to me, they are the benchmark. Moving up from B to A in Section 3, they are now the benchmark in Class A in Section 3. So it was a good test for them. But you'll be hearing more from New Hartford. That's going to be a team that's going to be around for a while. They get, at the same time as Notre Dame comes to Amsterdam, they play a Section 2 team around that same time frame. There's a pretty large tournament at the Nexus Center in Utica Odd area, and that's put on by the CNY Savage program, which is directed by Matt St. Croix, who used to be the men's coach of Mohawk Valley Community College. He's got daughters in the New Hartford program. He's now on staff with the New Hartford girls. So he's, it's like a 4-day mix of boys and girls, and they play Broad-Alban. I forget which day. It's somewhere in the course of the 27th through the 30th, but
Friday the 27th.
Friday the 27th,
They play Broad-Alban on Saturday.
So right about the same time that Amsterdam's going down, they'll play, they'll get their crack at a Section 2 team with Broad-Alban coming to town.
And I believe Academy is going to be going there too. I can't remember exactly who they're playing. Academy
probably plays CVA and Syracuse Academy of Science.
Albany Academy is playing Central Valley that Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sunday, Syracuse Academy of Science is Sunday.
I mean, their schedule maybe initially said Liverpool, but that ended up not being the case. And I know they kind of needed a team late, and ended up being SAS.
Right.
But
yeah. And then what's interesting is we could potentially get a rematch of that Academy Utica Notre Dame state title game because Martin Luther King weekend, Academy is going out to the Utica Notre Dame Classic. Academy will play Aquinas. UND will play Chenango Forks, and the winners will meet up the next day. So we could get a state title rematch from the Class B final last year come Martin Luther King weekend. So obviously we'll keep an eye on that next month.
John Snyder outdid himself with that field. And he's never backed down from a challenge. He's always looking for the best kind of matchups for his Notre Dame team, best kind of experience for his girls. And he had texted me at one point after, because I think Bishop Ludden was supposed to be in it, and they ended up backing out, and Aquinas took that spot. And in conversation with Snyder, he said, I've won a state championship and I still haven't won the Juggler Classic. And yeah, good luck with it happening this year too. That's a loaded field. Aquinas is a tremendous team. Obviously we know Academy. Notre Dame beat Chenango Forks in the regionals last year. Forks was the Class B champion in Section 4. They've got a stud that leads them, Maggie Warpus, that has, I don't know, more Division I offers than you can count on one hand. There's probably somewhere like 8 to 10 at this point, including Oregon State was the most recent one, I think, to jump in. So, he outdid himself. That's a tremendous field, Martin Luther King weekend.
Now, fast tracking to the weekend. We'll go with the way you kicked off your weekend. Friday night, you end up going to the Michelle Bennett Memorial, which you had teased last week with us. Triple header, Boston Spa wound up beating Glens Falls. Walnut Grove and Queensbury, the hosts. That was the nightcap with Walnut Grove beating Queensbury. And then in the middle, we had Corinth and I think it was Hudson Falls, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And that was a Corinth victory over Hudson Falls. When you look at those three games, what the Section 2 programs, was there one team in particular that stood out from the rest as far as who impressed you on the floor that night?
Early season basketball. Everyone's just trying to get their sea legs under them. So, and especially with the Foothills teams, the Foothills was the most active league in Section 2 over this past week. So I think Glens Falls had moved their Foothills plays Monday, Thursday, and they started league games, or they started games within their conference last week. So I think Glens Falls had moved their Thursday game, so I think they had Thursday off. But Queensbury played Monday, Thursday, going into that Friday, Saturday doubleheader, and their Thursday game was a low-scoring competitive rock fight against Broad Alban. So you play Broad Alban and then have to turn around and play Walnut Grove the next day. Hudson Falls, they had an overtime game with Glens Falls on Monday, and they had the little road trip to Amsterdam on Thursday, played a pretty competitive game. I think it was a 10-point game, and then have to turn around and play Friday. I'm not a big, I don't really subscribe to the kids are tired, it's a back-to-back, this and that. I don't really subscribe to it that much. Most of these kids play AAU where they have to play 4 or 5 games in a weekend. It's not something that they're not used to. But, yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about it. Third game in 5 days, second half of a back-to-back, or the middle of a back-to-back-to-back for the Foothills teams, or for Queensbury, Hudson Falls in particular. And when you're throwing in, obviously, Hudson Falls and Queensbury were both on the road on Thursday at Amsterdam and Broad Alban. So you get that bus ride back. What time you get back at 10 o'clock. you get a few hours of sleep. You have to go to school the next morning. Your next game. So, I felt like you could kind of see some of that. I don't know if fatigue is necessarily the right term. Maybe malaise, but there was a little bit of that to fight through. Boston Spa, Glens Falls. It was that was a rock fight for the first half. Though it was, that was one of those games that I think both teams were like, all right, we just got to work through this because this isn't our best basketball. But it turned into the second half. Glens Falls made a little push, and then Boston Spa made its push back early in the fourth quarter. Let's see, middle game, Corinth and Hudson Falls, probably the are they the Riverhawks now? I think Corinth. So I'm trying to get all these. I'm trying to get the name changes down. But
Corinth, Riverhawks. Yeah,
Riverhawks. There we go. I got it. Yeah, I mean they had probably the most comprehensive team performance of the day on Friday, and then I know they turned around. They lost to Glens Falls on Saturday, but on Friday when they played Hudson Falls, that was probably the most comprehensive team performance that I saw. Again, semi-slowish start. Everybody had a slow start. Whitney Cameron got hot, and she's the sort of kid that can do that. She can have those 25-point games or 14-point quarters, and second quarter offensively from a scoring standpoint, she was feeling it. I think hit maybe 3 threes in that quarter. Also did a really good job of getting everybody else involved. I thought they did a good job. They've got some athletes, grab defensive rebounds. A couple kids were always running in transition, and what fueled them was Wit probably at least 6-7 times good hit ahead pass in transition where just somebody streaking ahead, she looks up, on time, on target, 30-40 foot advance pass, just right in stride, one dribble layup, just kind of making it easy for the athletes. So they got it up to low 20s, I think, in the third quarter, and then really just kind of pumped the brakes. I think the final score maybe got down to about 12. But, they really, fourth quarter, they were trying to drain clock, late in the shot clock, really just kind of put it on ice. But it was good to be there. I wasn't sure. That was kind of a schedule change for me. I knew that it was going on, and my thought was, I feel bad that I'm going to miss it this year because I try to make it every year. I've made it the previous couple of years. Didn't anticipate making it this year. Changed my schedule kind of at the last minute. Maybe at about 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm like, let me not spend Friday night in a hotel in Binghamton. Let me go to Queensbury, watch these three. And worth the trip. Early season basketball, worth the trip. Got to see Foothills versus non-Foothills ×3. Got a good early look at Queensbury. Shea Canavan is back. I think we mentioned that last week where I'm like, I wasn't positive about her availability. Yep. She was out for about 3 months she had a procedure with a shoulder injury, but she is back. She got cleared, and so it was good to see her play. And Michelle Bennett Memorial. I've been around long enough at this point that the beauty and the pain is, I've got to know some of these people that there are now memorial tournaments named after. And She was a great person, obviously a beloved basketball figure up in the Saratoga Lake George region, and Michelle and Jeff had great children, great basketball playing daughters. That's why Walnut Grove made the trip up. Kenzie Bennett, who was about a decade ago one of the headliners in that area at Lake George, she's now coaching at Walnut Grove. So it was a nice little, full circle or whatever you'd like to call it. But it was nice to make that, to be able to get up there.
And just to follow up real quick on Maggie Warpus, you mentioned from Chenango Forks, going in reverse order from most recent offer to earliest offer. The schools I was able to find she has offers from: Lehigh, Oregon State, Bucknell, Loyola, Maryland, NJIT, St. Bonaventure, Binghamton, and Siena.
It was about 8. Okay.
Yeah. But at least that's what I was able to find thanks to Twitter. It's a wonderful thing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes being the operative there.
And she's got that. Honestly, I've been, if you follow my Twitter and whatnot, you know that I've kind of beat down the Maggie Warpus boat for, kind of driven the bus for a long time. She has that, right now, in a sense, I don't quite want to say level, obviously region, though, with Oregon State, there's kind of one of these things doesn't feel like it belongs here. She's got the, Oregon State, it's like a Pac-12 holdover. She's got that sort of potential. She's a junior, 6'2", long, really versatile. Like, will play, could play a face-up 4 at the next level, could play wing at the next level. Was used to playing a lot of point guard. Shoots the 3, creates for others. Long, wiry, but she's stronger than she looks. Just a player that puts her stamp on every facet of the game. And the physical aptitude, her upside is tremendous. She's a sort of 16 years old now. She's a sort of kid that you look at and you anticipate she's very, very good now, and she's not near her ceiling. She could continue to improve as an overall basketball player and within whatever her college role could potentially be when she's 20 and 21 years old too. So she's a headliner in upstate New York. Pretty good kid too, I guess.
And the last thing I wanted to touch on from your travels was your early part of your Saturday. You went to Delhi Delaware Academy for the final day of the Dick Alwine tip-off tournament. And Greenwich, you said they won't hang it in the Louvre, but Greenwich ends up walking away with the trophy for as winners of the tournament, winning by 10. Low scoring, especially considering the firepower Greenwich does have, but they were still able to come away with that victory and walk away with the trophy and finish the weekend 2-0.
Yeah, 2 different thoughts on that. One of them is, yes, we do look at the score. I mean, that was 40-30. It's not if you want to call it art, it was abstract art, right? Wasn't like a beautiful concerto, but I've had recently, I guess I'll name drop them. I've recently had a discussion with a conversation with Andy Callett at Union Springs, the coach at Union Springs. I know that you've had a chance to watch them a couple of years ago, and they made it to Hudson Valley in Class C. They're also a C. They're in Section 4. There's 2 main Class C leagues in Section 4. There's the MAC, which is generally speaking, the schools around that size east of I-81, kind of going up that 88 line, and then there's the IAC, which is west or on the 81 line and west. So, and Union Springs is an IAC, and he said, like that's what it is with the MAC schools. Like nothing, it never looks smooth. You never really you don't see high scoring games that you would look at and think aesthetically pleasing, but they just grind you out and they make life difficult and they limit possessions and they make everything tough on you. And that's kind of, Tego, I wouldn't necessarily play a zone against Greenwich. I think that their personnel, I think that they can eat teams up that zone them. Unitigo zoned them and it worked because of, I think part of that is, again, that's early season for Greenwich. I think getting crisp, getting more crisp in zone offense, maybe establishing roles a little bit more over the course of the season. I'd expect just kind of progress in those senses, but how it went in, we're talking the first week of December. It turned into, you want to try to limit Brooke Kuzmic's paint touches because she's very difficult to stay in front of. It limited her paint touches. It limited guards' paint touches because they always had feet in the paint. They always had somebody there. They have Unitigo's got good size on the back line, so if you're able to get into a gap, there's height and there's length that's across that back line. And it turned into for really a good most of the game. It turned into a lot of stationary, standstill, not in any sort of real rhythm threes for Greenwich. So do I think zoning them is necessarily going to work this season? No. But the way that Tego played their zone, the personnel that they had, and Greenwich kind of being early season in their execution and shot making, crispness, moving the ball against it. Yeah, I mean, it worked. Greenwich comes out 2-0 against two competitive Section 4 teams. And I think if you ask them, they'll say maybe they played 2 quarters of good basketball. So because it was a close game with Delhi at half. Delhi's got a young group. They're going to be around for a while. Todd Bruce is a tremendous coach. Todd had him prepared. And I talked with him on Saturday because that game was Friday night. I didn't get to see it. And he basically said, we don't really have anybody that can guard Kuzmic to begin with. And then the kid that we did have guarding her got in a little bit of foul trouble. And then we really didn't have anybody that could guard her. And Brooke had a big third quarter, turned from a 1-point game to, I think, a 14-point game after 3 on that Friday. But then that was a similar Saturday. Tego held a halftime lead. Greenwich's best time against the zone came out of the locker room to start the second half. They started to get into a little bit of a rhythm, and then Tego, after a timeout, they went man for the rest of the third quarter, which stopped the zone rhythm from continuing. So there was a little bit of a give and take. It stopped the zone rhythm from continuing, but then at the same time, it gave Brooke opportunities to get to the rim. And she started to get on track a little bit. And that she was they're going to have, they have the sort of team that they've got 4 or 5 kids that could be the one that steps up any given night. Olivia Davis I think she had a very strong weekend. I know she had a strong Friday, and she was a consistent presence on Saturday as well. And she's going to be very, very key to their success against the better teams that they play. But yeah, this was This was a solid Brook weekend to start the year. And yeah, Greenwich gets 2 competitive wins, 2+ hours away from home. And, over the course of 2 games, they probably feel like they didn't play that well.
All right, so let's get into the rest of the action around section 2, beginning with we'll start with Class D. A couple of interesting results that popped to me was Hartford. They ended up taking care of business against Spa Catholic early in the week, and then Friday night score that popped out to me from Friday night. Now, granted, okay, I know if I remember correctly. Let me just make sure I got my P's and Q's correct here. Granted, it is a Class B school. But Cobleskill wins at home by 7 over Northville, a team that, a Cobleskill team that had just been put through the ringer early in the week by Cooksaki Athens, ended up turning around and beating Northville by 7. Now, again, I mean, this is the Class D state runners-up at a Class B school, so might be necessarily comparing apples to apples, but I just thought those were 2 results that popped out to me. The Hartford win over Spa Catholic and Northville's 7-point loss on the road at Cobleskill.
Yeah, I'll work backwards because not trying to, this is in no way, I'm not trying to throw any sort of disrespect Cobbleskill's way, but I just watched them Monday. And I just watched how that game with Kisaki went. And I know it's early in the season, but I think a takeaway from that game is I thought Kisaki kind of took Cobbleskill's will away. You lose by 30, that's one thing, but I thought I thought Kisaki just kind of took their will to compete away. So when I saw that Cobleskill beat Northville, that was the first word that I wrote down in my notes as I've got my daily notes kind of going through, perplexing. But I just didn't bet on girls basketball if you want to go broke. I did not see that coming. The other side of that to an extent is last week when we did the previews and we talked about Class D in Northville and success breeding success from sport to sport and them just coming off a state championship in soccer. I guess the other side of that is also they just came off a state championship in soccer, right? So even basketball kids, there's only so many reps that they're able to get. There's a level of maybe being behind the 8 ball compared to what they would want to be at this point from a sheer basketball perspective. But it is a long season. To steal a line that Jamie Seward, the New Paltz coach, has said, and we've talked about like recruiting and being in the recruiting race for kids. They don't pay at the quarter pole. So, that a loss on December 6th doesn't change everything for you. But yeah, that was perplexing. It was perplexing enough that I pulled up the stream eventually. Didn't watch the whole thing, but I just kind of buzzed through it. Just did someone get hurt? Were they in deep foul trouble? What happened? And there's only some things don't translate well. That's why I like to be in gyms, in person, visible, watching stuff happen directly in front of me, not on the other end of a computer screen, because some things translate, some things you can see with the game film, some things don't. But I don't know. I feel, granted, it is early season, but I felt like what I watched in the live stream with Northville was a team that really didn't have life. So I don't know whether it was, just kind of a Friday night long bus trip, throwaway night kind of malaise or what it was. But, Cobleskill went on a third quarter run. It was I think it might have been a 1-point game at the half, and then Cobleskill extends it to 34-20 after 3. And just kind of watching that third quarter, it was just, like they were flat. They were really flat. So yeah, that's again early season stuff. And maybe an awakening that happens early that helps them down the road. Because whenever I talk to anybody about the WAC this year, anybody that's involved with the WAC, all I hear is Northville and Burn. Northville, Burn, Northville, Burn, Northville, Burn. It's all I hear. So maybe it's a little bit of an awakening as well. Again, December 6th too. So long season ahead. But yeah, that was an eye-catching result for sure. And then yeah, Hartford. We touched on the Hartford Spa Catholic game last week as far as previewing kind of a depth of Class D game, because I would just expect, if you made me put money on it, I would say 3 months from now or 2 months from now, we're looking at Northville is probably the 1 seed in Class D, and then the 2-3 is going to be between Hartford Spa Catholic. I think that those are there's 3 teams worth talking about, or 3 teams to talk about in D, and I think that those are the other 2. Spa Catholic, big time standout player in Sophia Ryan. She had 35 in a win over Granville on Monday, and then she had 30 at that game, 62-50 loss at Hartford. Forceful guard, high volume, high rep, high usage player, and always in attack mode. But what they bump into with Hartford is, Hartford's got a little more depth of guards. Mackenzie Johnson gave him 20 and gave him a good stat line across, but it's not just Mackenzie. They have Kaylin Severance alongside of her, and they've got a couple that are alongside of those 2 as complementary players that can just kind of, give them valuable role player stuff. So, and then I think that game was at Hartford too. Hartford gets rowdy. It's kind of a tough place to play. Up kind of the top corner of the section, and I feel like the acoustics in that gym, it's just, even if you have 10 people in there, it feels, it's loud. But there's not that much seating, so it fills up quickly. The noise bouncing off the walls, it's a tough place to go win a game. So good litmus test, good win for Hartford.
All right, then moving on to Class C. Got to give a quick shout out to my boy Mike Long Jr. Gets his first win as head coach for Hoosick Falls. They end up taking care of business against Emma Willard. But the one team I want to focus in on, particularly in Class C, staying in the WAC, they may have lost Alex Moses and Hannah Mulhern and Allison O'Hanlon, but Dwaynesburg's finding a way to get things done early in this season. They end up splitting a pair of games Thanksgiving weekend at a holiday tournament, beating Schoharie, but then losing to Cherry Valley Springfield. Then this past week, they took care of business, beating Canongahary by 9 and beating NDBG Friday night by 15. A team that, it looks like they're going to be relying a lot on Mia Moses and Ella Raymond, but all in all, 3-1 is 3-1, and 2-0 in your conference is 2-0 in your conference. So, you take care of the stuff that's right in front of you, regardless of how it all plays out. It makes things more interesting for this Wednesday night, their only game this week, because they'll be taking on an OESJ squad who's 3-0 themselves. So, it's again, like you said, it's early in the season, but if you see things that are going well early, it just breeds more confidence, and could potentially lead to bigger things down the road.
Yeah, and they've, Dwaynesburg, just sounds like common sense, but it's intelligent. They've changed their scheduling a bit. This is not that team that they've had the last 3 years, where they were able to go be adventurous with their non-league schedules, with the Amsterdams or the Amsterdam Showcase and the Colonies and the Gilderlands and all those teams that they played. They've scheduled kind of accordingly for what they are. Like, keep it local, get those games in the Schoharie tournament. Very different team. There's still a little bit of holdover with with Ella Raymond started on last year's team. Chloe Galvin is still in the mix. She came off the bench for him, but she did see minutes for them last year. So they have a little bit of a hold. They have a little bit of holdover. They'll still get some whack wins. They're still going to get some whack wins. They're still around. Ella looks like Ella's going to be. I mean, the ball's got to be in her hands. Obviously, exponentially more than it was when Allison O'Hanlon, Alex Moses, and Hannah Mulhern were around. But she can be a 15 to 20 point kid for them. Chloe Galvin can get hot kind of any given night. Stretching the floor, 3, 4, 5 threes. You mentioned good old Mia Moses. Their scheduling was smart. More competitive. This is something they could be more competitive in. They got some early wins. Just getting that little bit of early season confidence. The only, I guess, going back on what I just said about the WAC with everybody saying Northville Burn, the only time I really ever heard anybody say anything about anyone besides Northville and Bern was Coach Galvin at Bern, and he brought up OESJ. And he's like, they're going to be better. They're going to be. He mentioned that they were going to be improved this year, and they've had a group of kids that have been around for a while. This should be with who has graduated, who doesn't have varsity teams, who this, who that. OESJ should be. This should be the most competitive that their girls basketball team has been since those schools merged, probably. So, yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting, those two playing against each other. That's kind of an interesting game as far as if especially if you're a WAC enthusiast or supporter, you live in that area, you care about girls basketball. Like that's an interesting depth of the WAC game as far as how standings play out and how everything shakes out.
Then shifting over to Class B, we mentioned in passing earlier, Coxsackie Athens, they take care of business with Cobleskill and Waterville Elite. I'll refrain from saying their Tuesday night opponent because that's going to be a game I think we're going to highlight in a little bit. But they come out, they go 2-0. Mechanicville, they've opened the season with a few wins. Johnstown, they snapped their 46-game losing streak, winning 2 out of their first 3 this past week. And then they'll be back in action Saturday against not back in action Saturday, but they'll be having a home game this coming Saturday against Coxsackie Athens, a good litmus test for Johnstown in that regard. So, Class B, we said it was going to be pretty wide open. But Coxsackie Athens and Mechanicville obviously getting out to strong starts, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. Catskill got a nice win also during the week, so things are starting out a bit interesting in that regard.
Yeah, Catskill probably worth mentioning. Granted, it was a blowout win against Carroll Durham team. Will probably be around the lower end of the league, but the most eye-catching stat line that I saw this week in Section 2 was probably Ava on Chris Quinn's Facebook, I noticed Ava Edmond went for 34, 22 rebounds, and 11 steals in that game. And that's she'll big time athlete. She'll put up some, and it won't just be against those teams. It'll be against some of the more competitive teams on their schedule. She'll put up some pretty gaudy stat lines this year. You'll see like Ava Edmond had some stat lines of like 22 points and 19 rebounds when Janae Brantley was still around. So, and granted, Janae was there, so that helps a little bit. But she put up some big stat lines, even a couple of years back. So she's gonna have some pretty eye-catching numbers at times this year. But yeah, I mean, B is B around here. I think we're just we'll be talking about the same sort of stuff with it being relatively open, maybe later in the season, just with how teams develop and how complementary players develop over the course of the year, as as these kids have a basketball in their hands 5 or 6 times a week over the course of months. Maybe some teams will mesh a little bit better together and will establish potential front runners in the next 6 weeks or so. But yeah, it's pretty open, and there hasn't been anything that I've seen that was any sort of a surprise. Mechanicville's got their depth of athletes. They beat Greenville this week, and I think the final score was 14, but I also think they were up near 30 at half. And I think they held Greenville to 7 in the first half, and with the sort of athletes Mechanicville has, and it's a scrappy group, that's they'll make life difficult on you. So if Mechanicville and Coxsackie were ever, those are the two we've talked about the most, if they were to ever bump up against each other, that would be an interesting maybe contrast of styles, of one team that's a little bit more grinded out and another one that wants a little more free-flowing up and down sort of game. But yeah, I haven't really seen anything that was like eye-catching or a surprise, just teams kind of doing what they're supposed to do early. And yeah, I know that you saw Johnstown, and the situation there, if that's the definition of a rebuild, right? Not fielding a varsity team last year, trying to build back up through the youth and JV only, and other sport. Johnstown used to be, at least in my time, they were never at the top of the section in Class B in my time doing this, but there was a stretch where they were relatively competitive kind of throughout the whole line, whether it was their coach now, I know that Megan Anagnosopoulos, that I think my first year doing this, she was a senior. And then you go from that to the Anna Lees and Jaden Wilsons of the world. So yeah, definitely a big time rebuild for them. But or was it 2 years ago? Pardon. I think they fielded varsity last year, didn't win. But a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't.
3 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't field a varsity team. Like the year after Jaden Wilson graduated.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's got a couple wins. You've got an alum coaching, as the lead of your program. Johnstown has had success in other girls' sports, field hockey and stuff like that. So maybe get a little bit more life back into that program. Just a little bit more public interest, a little more interest in the youth basketball. So always like to see that.
Certainly. There is one thing I was actually remiss in not bringing up from Class C. I don't know if you saw this. Stillwater beating Guilderland by more than 20 this past week.
Oh yeah, Stillwater's good.
We know Stillwater's good, but And I know Gilderland, they got their new coach Jeremy Friel, the former Albany assistant, but to go out and face a team that you know uh, hypothetically is supposed to be, how should I put this, a different breed compared to you, Stillwater. They went out there, and all credit to Coach Chapko. She had her squad ready, and yeah, they took care of business real good again out at Gilderwood this past week.
Yeah, I had a couple people bring that game up to me over the weekend if I expected it. And did I expect plus 24 on the road because they played at Guilderland? Did I expect Stillwater plus 24 on the road? Maybe not quite that. Was it a shock to see it? No. I'm still, they're good. They're good. It's one of those teams, I mean, you can put them up against a lot of the bigger schools, not like the top of the line, but not the Colonies and Shakers, so on, but that next line, and they're going to do fine. It's an enjoyable group to watch. They put 5 kids on the floor that they can put 5 kids on the floor with no liabilities. They can put 5 kids on the floor that are all that suburban AA, AAA, whatever level athlete too. Like there's nobody they put on the floor that's getting swallowed up by the speed of the game and the athleticism at higher classifications in Section 2. So, yeah, they're good. I'm sure that we're going to talk about one of their games they have coming up this week.
Yeah. And then Class A, it's funny because I had a discussion about this because last week I ended up having the Perry twins from Broad Alban Perth, and I was like, who the hell made this schedule for you? I mean, they're about to, as we're recording this Monday, December 9th, they're about to play their 5th game in 8 days to start the season, which is wild. But I mean, it's worked out all right so far. They beat South Glens Falls to open their season on Monday. Then they beat Queensbury by 5 on Thursday to snap the Spartans' 28-game Foothills Council winning streak and Queensbury's 13-game winning streak over BP that existed going into that game. And then right back at it, BP, they end up sweeping the 2 games in the tournament they share with Burn Hills. Friday night, they beat Troy at Burn Hills, and then Saturday, they came back home and beat Burn Hills. And then tonight, they host a 2-1 Glens Falls team before going to Amsterdam for part 1 of that crosstown rivalry for the season on Thursday. So, very front-end loaded schedule for Broad Alban Perth, but it clearly is giving results with a 4-0 start for them.
Yeah, a little interesting. Part of that is having a tip-off tournament. Part of it is the Foothills schedule. Nobody else has played. Well, not nobody else, but for the most part, we haven't really seen league games kick in yet. And last week, you saw the Foothills North half and South half playing each other twice. So there was Broad Alban is doing it right now with their 5th game in 8 days. I know AA, so we're not talking about them at all, necessarily right now. But Queensbury, who you just brought up because that was a Thursday game, they're doing their same thing. They're playing their 5th game in 8 days tonight. Hudson Falls, I think they're back at it. There's a few of these Foothills teams that if they played a tip-off tournament, they've got their 5th game in 8 days coming up. So you see a lot of this front-loaded in that conference. It's a lot of games right off the bat for a team that is trying to figure out what their identity is, but what their makeup is going to be this year. What's their what's their point guard situation? What's their offensive identity? That's, I guess, a better way of putting it. We know what their defensive identity is, and their defensive identity has been the driving force of this team over the last couple of years. But what exactly is their offensive identity going to be? What's their who's initiating offense for them in the half court? Who's all these sorts of things, and yeah, you get 4 games in a week, 5 games in 8 days, but big win over Queensberry. Another one, I wasn't there. I didn't, just because I was lazy and didn't ask to see how long, if Shea was cleared and how long it was going to be. But if I realized Shea was playing, I probably would have went to Broad Albin that day. But I didn't. Granted, 38-33 is kind of a slugfest. So high level game, but probably another one. The common theme is very early season ish, with neither team getting to 40. But yeah, that's a with this build through this senior class, and then the couple pieces that have graduated before. Within the foothills, that was the one hump that Broad Albin hadn't been able to get over yet. They hadn't been able to get over Queensberry, and they were close. I watched a game they played each other last year, but Shea Canavan was just a difference for them in that regard. Having that dominant point guard that can control the pace and style, and maybe the one kid that Broad Albin couldn't really turn over within the foothills, and being able to get that win the first week of the season, even as they're trying to figure themselves out, potentially a good sign for them. Probably a good, probably a feel-good win too.
Taking a look now at Double A, I mean the one part of the schedule in Double A that popped out to me was the Averill Park tip-off tournament this past weekend, and the you mentioned how early season basketball, a lot of moving parts to figure out, and I feel like that tip-off tournament was one of the better examples of that, because Columbia and Bethlehem had one of those kinds of games, and they'll actually be turning around and seeing each other again in official Suburban Council play tomorrow night on Tuesday the 10th. Columbia wound up coming away with the victory in that particular matchup. Averill Park, they end up, I'm trying to think. Oh, they end up being Niskayuna, and then Averill Park was able to escape with a victory over Columbia the next day on Saturday. So, we mentioned how, this wasn't going to be the same Averill Park that we've been used to seeing the last decade or so, but Averill Park, Coach Organ able to find a way to get 2 victories to start the season, and march forward into next game up.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Because if you rewind a year ago, 3 of the 4 teams were the same. The only swap out was, I think, Gilderland was in it last year and Niski was in it this year. But same matchup. Bethlehem and Columbia played each other in the first round, and AP against a team that wears red in the second game. Last year, Bethlehem beat Columbia. I was there that night. Bethlehem beat Columbia. Columbia looked pretty out of sorts for a while. I think they had a little maybe furious run to make it seem more competitive late, but Bethlehem really had the better of that matchup. Averill Park wins the other one. Averill Park and Bethlehem play each other in the championship, and AP barely squeaks by with like a 2-point slog of a game that didn't make it to 40, like 37-35 or 38-37 or something like that. And then fast forward to this year, it's just Columbia and Bethlehem flip. Like Columbia gets the better of Bethlehem. And then Averill Park and Columbia play to a back and forth, nip tuck close the whole way, 2-point game. And then foreshadowing, let's see if this happens. Last year, same thing, because the suburban schedule, for some reason, seems to never change. The Tuesday after the Averill Park tournament, when Bethlehem and Columbia played each other that Friday, they played each other that Tuesday. They played in Columbia. And right after Bethlehem, or I don't did they play? I don't even remember if they played in Columbia or Bethlehem. I'll wipe that one from my brain. But 4 days after Bethlehem got the better of Columbia and Averill Park, they won again, but Columbia took them, I think, to double overtime. So fast forward to this year, it's the same thing. Again, schedules never change, apparently. And right after the Columbia Bethlehem, they get to play each other again on Tuesday, just like this year. So let's see if maybe this one will go 5 overtimes. Maybe Devendorf will jump on a scorer's table or something.
Oh, please, no 5 overtimes. Don't do that. Don't do that.
But yeah, good. That's a really good Class AA area barometer, right? It kind of worked out. Columbia at this stage, a little bit above, a little bit beyond Bethlehem. Is what you would expect. You would expect AP. You would expect Columbia to get up for AP, and you would expect that game to be competitive. Columbia pushed them for a half in game, I think regular season game last year. Kind of in line with what you would expect. I think a takeaway for me is it seemed like no real blowouts. Niski lost both games, but it wasn't. There wasn't a blowout over the course of that, which maybe says something about it's the pecking order can be the pecking order, but it's a little bit closer, or it's a little bit tighter from 1 to 5, 1 to 6. But yeah, I mean, almost everybody that you would look at as like a legitimate Class AA part of the conversation was covered there. Your main exception would be Catholic Central, who was down in the city over the weekend. 2 losses against 2 really good teams at the Slinky Showcase that Joe Fenelon put together, the NYG Hoops. They lost to Ursuline School out of Section 1, Class AAA. They lost that one by 2. I think it was a 1-possession game where Ursuline's main kid, Sophie Nascimento, was committed to Sacred Heart, had a game winner in final seconds. And then they kind of took one on the chin Sunday against Monsignor Scanlon, who Scanlon is probably one of the top 5 teams in the city this year. So Catholic High went down there. Great competition. Didn't get a win, but very good competition. I would say that Joe and Slink treated them well with the schedule, getting them a couple really high-level games. And, and Averill Park was a great barometer just, for early season and a taste perhaps of what's to come. And I always like that, that the schedule in recent years has been that for the AP tip-off. And it's always fun to see what it was like at the beginning of December. And then as they match up with each other, say by like Regents time, that mid-late January into early February, you get later in the season. I think it's always interesting to see the growth of teams over the course of 8 weeks.
Well, Class AAA, honestly, we already covered all the action that happened in AAA, really, with Gilliland losing to Stillwater, and then Saratoga Springs, we pretty much covered the bulk of their opening week. So really, just matter of just going into the schedule, I guess. Take a look at the games, the notable games coming up this week. I want to start with tonight real quick. The game that pops out to me would have to be Mechanicville Greenwich. One of the top contenders in Class B against a team that I think a lot of people are just kind of handing Class C to, but like we discussed last week, I think just handing just saying it's gonna be them is kind of a disservice to Class C in a way. But yeah, Mechanicville Greenwich to me definitely the highlight of the night coming up tonight.
Yeah, no, it is. I've got one game written down for Monday night, and it's that Mechanicville Greenwich. It's a rematch of the Wazern League championship from last year. The two, they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily that one is always at the top of the Wazern every year, because it wasn't that long ago when Cambridge ran the show in that league for a few years. But Mechanicville and Greenwich in my time doing this are the two most consistent Wazern programs. And Coach Slater at Greenwich has had it the whole time that I've been here. Mechanicville's flipped hands a couple times, but it's always kind of, it's the same Mechanicville program. It's the same sort of style. It's, the same grittiness that you expect out of that group. So that's, Mechanicville Greenwich has always seemed to be one to circle with Wazern League girls basketball. And yeah, I mean, this year is certainly no different, and good. Probably the first. I mean, it's the first real test for Mechanicville, and yeah, that's the game of the night in Section 2 on tonight on Monday.
And then looking at Tuesday, there's going to be a few games I want to touch on. We already touched on Columbia Bethlehem, so I won't bring that up. But before we get into the handful of games I see for Tuesday night, I feel like there's a program we didn't get to talk about last week that I was remiss in bringing up, just because they didn't play any games yet until they're not playing any until this Tuesday and Friday. Voorheesville, new head coach Terrence Florence, the main man behind the scenes and on the sidelines in some ways with the Havoc Pro AAU program. First year head coach for the Blackbirds, and it's going to be an interesting way to introduce yourself into the Section 2 sidelines. Congratulations, you're the new head coach. Your first two games, yeah, they're at home, but it's against Albany Academy and Catholic Central, so it's like, all right, initiation by fire, I guess. But very interesting to see T-Flow get that job and get onto the sidelines in Section 2. What were your thoughts when you heard about T-Flow getting the position, and what do you make of what he could do for this Voorheesville program?
I was looking forward to seeing how it would go, and I feel like Terrence on a Scholastic sideline it's not his first go around with it. He's coached it. He recently had Albany leadership for a little bit, but it's going to give that program, it's going to give his team and that program as a whole a jolt of energy. And you bring him under your sidelines, it changes the expectations of the program as far as commitment level and buy-in and the work ethic piece. That's, you expect to see I don't want to say a more competitive group necessarily, like that's not the word necessarily that I'm looking for, but he gets a job. I expect to see kind of a more all-in approach with that program, and it seems like he's got good buy-in early. And they've been at it. They've got some night practices. I know a couple days a week they do 6 a.m. practices. It seems like he's got total buy-in with that group. He's a very skill-based coach as well, so probably more skill development going on in those practices than what you would see a lot in the scholastic ranks. And I know, yeah, he's pushed some games back, just basically like, yes, Academy and Catholic High are coming up, and those are the first two, but hey, might as well like, it is what it is. Might as well treat those like scrimmages. Right. Let's see what we are. Let's see where we're at, and get better over the course of the year. Uh, I expect to see. I expect to see a team that's going to get better over the course of the year. Uh, as they adjust to his expectations and he adjusts to them. Um, I expect to see them get better over the course of the year. I also expect them to see them get better over the course of the year because of the amount of time that they're going to put in from their own individual skill pieces on top of the team development. And I know that he's told me that he's been high on that part of it with them. He feels like he's been getting buy-in from them. He feels like they've been putting in the work. He feels like a lot of those kids are even doing additional work on their own outside of the practices. So he seems to be excited about that. And I expect to see kind of an exciting brand of basketball. Up tempo, a lot of pressure, a lot of floor spacing, maximizing possessions. Ball's going to be in Mia Carmody's hands a lot. They'll work through her. So, yeah, it's a tough slate for them to start with Academy and Catholic High. Those are just kind of different animals, but he's got a pretty young group with Mia. Mia's the sort of kid that could be a 20-plus point per game scorer for him this year. And then he's got a lot of youth. He's got some freshmen and eighth graders up the varsity level. So, and a couple that have some real potential. So, he's got something to build around. And looking forward to seeing how this goes over the course of the year. So I think they could be a fun watch come the second half of the year.
Now, as far as other games of note for Tuesday night, 3 caught my eye. Not sure if there's any others that popped out for you, but for me, Cooksaki at Maple Hill popped out for me, just because you get Regan and Bailey in that squad, taking on Addie Lazinski and Coach Oliver out there at Maple Hill. Troy at Holy Names, just because I'm always intrigued by certain Colonial Council matchups and getting a young AA team, like we mentioned earlier in the show with Troy against Holy Names, who, yeah, they lose Sophia Bologna, but they still have a great amount of that core from last year's run to the A finals coming back. And then Averill Park at Shaker tomorrow night. It's, we you saw what I saw with Shaker Thanksgiving weekend, and I've been looking forward to seeing them get back on the floor. They've had a little over a week off to, rest up, practice, get a little more familiar with Malia Jackson, the game that she can bring to their, in the paint for them with all the athletes that are already on that squad. And obviously we mentioned Averill Park earlier. So those are 3 matchups that stood out to me for Tuesday night.
Yeah, I personally will be at AP Shaker. That's the plan. I only have a couple local days this week, but that is one of them. I'm anticipating being at AP Shaker. Yeah, and Troy Holy Names is like, that's a sneaky one. Just it's a new Colonial matchup. Young players, both sides. It's without, like you said, without Sophia Bologna. A lot of times in scoring columns, Holy Names has a decent amount of seniors in the rotation that are very meaningful to them. When it comes to the scoring column, a lot of time you're going to see the leading scorers, sophomore and freshman. I think that's what it was on Saturday. They went off to Syracuse and they beat CBA by 20. And I think it might have been Maggie Vollmer and Lizzie Blanche that had 18 apiece or something like that. Maggie's a sophomore, Lizzie's a freshman that played JV last year. So that's You have youth there. Troy, we've already mentioned their youth. I feel like and I just feel like the players that are involved and kind of the moving parts that are involved with Giggs on the Holy Names bench and Will on the Troy bench. I feel like there's that could be an exciting game. It could be it could be a fireworky sort of game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Maple Hill, Kisaki. That's one. And when I was talking about Patroon players, and I said Bailey, as far as like your most natural, like gifted athlete in the Patroon, I totally neglected. There's one that you can bring up in the conversation alongside of her, and it's Addie at Maple Hill. So you have two of the better, more gifted, more explosive basketball athletes in Section 2 leading the way in that matchup. Good first real test for both teams, and potentially top of the Patroon. Am I forgetting anybody? That's the top. I mean, Catskill will find their way to be around.
Catskill maybe, but
Catskill's gonna find their way to be around. But those are the two going into the season. Yeah, this is the one that you circle.
Greenville could be sneaky because they have a lot of young talent as well. But again, it's all be about that's really going to be about how they'll adjust to first year head coach Bobby Shields too. So, Maple
Hill Kisaki is the one that you like. That's the matchup that you circle in that league right now.
Certainly, yeah.
And they get an early look at each other, so that'll be entertaining.
Yeah. Then looking to Wednesday, we already mentioned briefly the Dwaynesburg OESJ matchup. A couple of things that popped out to me. Johnstown, they get to go to Northville, so a good test early on. They get to face the Class D state finalists. They have Haley Monroe back. I think they only lost one senior, if I remember correctly, from that squad last year. Haley now a senior herself. Cobleskill going to BKW. And then Hoosick Falls, another young team. They got an 8th grader at point guard. Ava Case, I believe, is a freshman, if I remember correctly, on Hoosick Falls. They go and play Mechanicville on Wednesday as well. Those were the couple matchups that popped out to me.
Yeah, Wednesday's a travel day for me. I know that was, I looked at the Section 2 schedule, and felt like compared to some other days this week, I might be kind of clutching at straws. There's some decent, as you mentioned, like those matchups are the ones of the day, and they're kind of like depth of the WAC sort of things, and maybe important ones for individual teams as well. Like Hoosick Falls barometer at a top of the Wazzer, and the Johnstown barometer at a top of the WAC. Cobleskill barometer coming off of that quality win, playing at Bern, which I think Bern is the toughest place to get a win. I think that's toughest place to get a win in the WAC. Anybody, even if it's a high level team, getting a win at Bern is a tough slate. So that's gonna be a travel day for me. I think I'm going downstate, but yeah, WAC Wednesdays.
Yeah, and then Thursday night, two, I think, pretty cool matchups actually popping out on a random Thursday night. Now, it's not that we're going to talk about Thursday night games in the schedule. Usually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. Those are the 4 main weeknights. But this Thursday, I think two pretty good matchups coming out here. Chalmont, they're going to go to Troy. We mentioned Troy a lot, but Chalmont, a team we haven't talked too much about. Ariana Brandon, Gianna Cirilla, they look good in their opener last week for Coach Van Hosen. And then another matchup, Stillwater at Greenwich. That's a stellar matchup as well for Thursday night.
Yeah, and an interesting test for Chalmont as well. Like that's a good guard battle, Chalmont and Troy, and Chalmont's got maybe a little more guard depth, maybe a little more seasoned. Not trying, just Troy's such a young group, 8th, 9th grade. But it's Troy's got a kid that we haven't really talked about so much yet that I've seen a little bit before. She's recent transfer to the area. I had seen her a little bit in her old home in northern New York before she moved to the area, but I think will make waves in this area before long. They've got an 8th grade post player, Kiana Tiernan, that was impressive in spurts at Toga. She'll be looking, a young player in a post, so she still has to grow into her body in a sense. Although she's advanced with that as a 6-footer that's her age, she's really, kind of matured and grown into her body and great coordination and footwork for her size and age. She'll be searching for that. The next progression is probably that level of consistency. She kind of showed it in spurts at Toga, but she's even just as an 8th grader, like, that's a legitimately solid Colonial Council post player. So that's going to be a good test for Chalmont going up against that sort of kid and somebody that embraces post play. So that'll be interesting for them. And then Stillwater Greenwich, that's my other local day. I'm planning on going to Greenwich. That's one of those, like, there's other things. Thursday's a pretty good day statewide. There's a lot of, some days I feel like I'm struggling to try to just come up with something that's really interesting. And then there's some days that I wish that there were 5 of me. There's a lot going on Thursday throughout the state that I'm going to be interested in. But Stillwater Greenwich is one of those, like, it's in my area and it's happening. That I feel like I can't not go to that game. And I think that's 2 of early season. What my expectation would be, that's probably 2 of the top 5 Class C teams in the state. Greenwich is another place that's difficult to get a win. They will certainly hope to make some progress and look a little better, a little more crisp on Thursday than they did over the weekend, and they'll need to. They'll need to for this matchup. So fun, it's not that often that, and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but it's not that often that you can go to a small school basketball game, like a Class C level game, and watch 2 teams be able to put 10 players out on the court at one time with no liabilities. Greenwood can put 5 on the court with no liability. Stillwater can put 5 on the court with no liability. That's the sort of thing that you anticipate in a large school game, in a double, in a stronger suburban game, or a top of the Colonial game. 2 C schools being able to do that. They're 95% of Class C schools in the state. They're going to put somebody out on the court that you kind of just don't have to guard. Stillwater and Greenwich, they don't have that. So that's that's definitely a separating factor for them. Good guard play. The physicality of Olivia Davis as your dribble drive forward for Greenwich against kind of the length and wiry shot blocking nature of an Andy Luskin at Stillwater. Some intriguing individual matchups and definitely a high level small school team battle. And 2 teams, it makes it even better with 2 teams with that talent and their league foes. They either it's somewhere in that line, they kind of share a district line across the river from each other. probably 15-ish minutes from one school to the other, like 15 to 20 at the most. That makes it a little bit more fun too. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Friday nights. 3 games popped out at me, all Suburban Council games for classes AA and AAA. A young Burn Hills Boston Lake team, they're going to visit Averill Park Friday night. Colony, they take a trip out to Columbia. And then Albany High, team we haven't really heard from yet this year. They will visit a Bethlehem team that has an interesting mix. They got some experience, some seniors. They got Von Weedle, they got Gaetano, they got Robbins, they've got Bannigan, but also at the same time, a new head coach in Coach Pacini. So still a little bit of a filling out process as far as the system they're going to run and how the roster is going to effectively use it in the case of Bethlehem.
Yeah, that game in particular, it's only been, or by the time we get to that Friday, it will have only been 2 weeks since they started off their season against Bethlehem, started off their season against Liverpool. And it's very much a different kind of pressure that Albany throws on you compared to Liverpool. But I know Bethlehem had a lot of trouble with Liverpool's 1-3-1 with the pressure that they were able to throw a couple weeks ago early in the year. Albany, more matching up, more run and jump, more physical, but pressure nonetheless. So as another couple of weeks go by, this is another test of pressure. So curious to see how they handle that, how they're able to handle what Albany brings for 32 minutes with this year's group in particular. Time will tell. Yeah, that'll go a long way in determining how that game goes. Colony Columbia, that is probably to me, that's the headlining matchup of the day. Just Colony is Colony, and if Columbia is at their best, nobody in Section 2, regardless of class, can look past them. And they gave Averill Park a great run on Saturday at AP. Their talent at the top is their talent at the top is as much of a headliner as just about anybody in Section 2. And I think that one's at Columbia, right? So good little road test for Colony. So that one to me, AAA versus AA, whatever, like that's a good headliner of a game for Friday night.
And then little selfish plug. There are a few games for the weekend as well. It's the first weekend of the Coaches versus Cancer event that is put together by Tamarack Boys varsity coach Eric Medved. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. I've been a part of it the last few years, and now we're going to be using over the 2 weekends 5 different schools. We're going to be using Hudson Valley, LaSalle, Union College, U Albany, and Siena. All 5 of those gyms at some point over the next 2 weekends. The opening weekend of it, 4 different girls' games over the course of Saturday and Sunday. Back-to-back at Hudson Valley on Saturday. There's going to be AP taking on Cicero North Syracuse. And then a Suburban Council matchup, Shen against Bethlehem. Those are scheduled for 3 and 4:30 roughly on Saturday. And then Sunday morning, 10:30, Boston Spa will take on Mahonison at Hudson Valley. And also at their Columbia at noon will be taking on Red Hook. So those are the 4 girls matchups for the weekend at Hudson Valley. Any one of those in particular kind of pop out at you?
Yeah, CNS AP should be a fun matchup. That's Coach Oregon and Coach Seitchen. That's just an annual date for the last decade or so. Whether it was agreed upon or forced, because for a long time, the current CNS coach, Rob Seitchen, was the coach at Jamesville DeWitt when they were making their state runs in the 2010s. So every year AP was bumping up against JD in regionals. AP wins Section 2, JD wins Section 3 in Class A. They bump up against each other the second weekend of March and go from there. So that's been, and when Coach Seichin was at JD, they never matched up during the season because that was always just a forced matchup that they knew they were going to see each other in March. Once Rob got the CNS job, I think ever since then, that's been a scheduled matchup where they've played each other, CNS Averill Park, because they're not in CNS to AAA. Well, now with the current form, CNS is AAA, AP is AA. Before we flipped to the sixth class, AP was an A and CNS was a AA. So, now that it's not a potential playoff matchup, that's just one that's agreed upon. The what's funny about this current group over with the North Stars is that when JD and Averill Park played each other, they had very distinct styles. It wasn't even necessarily the coaching aspect of it as much as the players themselves. It was very different styles. With AP, the toughness, the ruggedness, like JD saying, we're not going to win a toughness battle against them. We just have to match it for 32 minutes. We just have to match it on the glass. We can't get swallowed up by it. We got to do what we do, but just for 32 minutes, we got to match that. Where JD a little bit more, it was always a little bit more free flowing. And then even when Rob got to CNS, that was still the sort of makeup of the two teams. Coach Seichin has like an Averill Park-ish team this year, in the sense particularly of the toughness element. They're just kind of across the board. Their guard play with Olivia Cook, forwards with Grace Villeneuve, like these are tough kids. Like Liv Cook and Lizzie Hansen, I would watch them box. I would watch them wrestle. Grace Villeneuve and Lily Wallaber, I would watch them box. There's a grittiness to this matchup that should be entertaining. CNS has a strong team. They're right there. I think they're right there with Liverpool. They're in the conversation with Liverpool and AAA in Section 3. And they've got a sophomore, Leah Benedict, that's already attracting Division I attention, knockdown shooter, kind of parking lot range. There'll be a Julie Howell, another tough guard. She won't be playing basketball in college because she's committed to Marquette for lacrosse. But it's a tough, grind it out sort of team. So that'll be that will be, I would anticipate that's 32 minutes of physical battle. Some 32-minute games don't feel like they're 32 minutes. You feel like you got done. You just got done with a war. I kind of expect that with that matchup. Bethlehem Shen, obviously all suburban. Go to Sunday. We'll see Boston Spa Mahonison and Columbia Red Hook. Red Hook struggling a little bit out of the gate in Section 9. Just they graduated their backcourt, so guard play is very much a transitional thing for them right now. But they have Emily Kent in the middle, who's probably going to be asked to do a lot for them this year, and that's a good. That having somebody like that's a good individual matchup sort of test for Columbia of how you guard somebody that is, how you guard a front court heavy team, what sort of matchup you figure out who you want to guard against a dominant forward presence. So it could be a useful matchup for Columbia. I think it's a tough matchup for Red Hook, I'll put it that way. But It'll be a useful matchup for Columbia.
And Emily's coming up a nice, strong spring and summer also with Elevate under Coach Capitula. So it'll be interesting to see how that translates to her in her school season. Because if I remember correctly, she still hasn't officially made her college decision, but she has a couple different things that she's weighing. So we'll see there. But you mentioned you remember Coach Seishin and Jamesville DeWitt. So my first introduction to the state level of competition was shadowing good old friend Jim Malone a number of years ago. And that was also my first introduction to Jamesville DeWitt. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because for whatever reason, I got not for whatever reason before the college season started, a month and a half ago, we'll call it. I was just looking around different rosters to figure out where Section 2 talents were populating themselves at schools with, within like a 3-hour radius of the area. I came across a name that I knew was familiar, and I had to remind myself why. And it was the first time that I felt a little old in a way. Momo LeClaire is a damn senior in college right now.
Momo!
So that made me want to go back and look at her freshman year because for whatever reason that popped out at me. The 17-18 Jamesville DeWitt team. I mean, we're talking Sydney Baker, Julia Kellner, Andrea Samita, Gabby Stickle, and then, of course, Momo, and can't forget two of the captains in Meg Hare and Jamie Boeheim. So, yeah, that's a squad that has always stuck out in my mind, was that specific year of JD. It was, of course, always nice to see Coach Boeheim in the stands for the JD games when they were at Hudson Valley. But, yeah, that was my first official, oh, my God, I think I'm starting to do this a little too long for myself. When I saw Momo was a senior in college this year, I was like, oh, my God. Because I still remember freshman Momo coming off the bench, braces, headband. And I'm like, oh, God. Like, yeah. That was my first. I'm starting to get a little old for this feeling.
Good old Momo. She's got a younger sister that's on the JD team now.
Yeah.
And more of a lacrosse kid, I think. But she had a game. She had a game last week. I think she got in double digits. But yeah, I didn't bump into Momo, but I bumped into her mother about a week and a half ago when I was out in Canandaigua. So it was a good little catch up. We were kind of doing the same sort of, mom was in the reminiscing sort of phase of, still at it. So really good people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, always a fan of the LeClairs. Momo was one of my favorites. Meg Hare was one of my favorites too. Like those are two kids that you have to really get to know somebody to, as far as like judging the outward appearance, as far as how much somebody cares about the game.
Yeah,
because I had always had to answer those questions about Meg and Momo. People asking like, "Oh, how much do they really care?" Because they just look so chill. They look so even keeled. The demeanor on their faces never changed. When things were up or down, it was all, they were always very level. And if you don't know somebody or if you read it the wrong way, there are people that are like, well, how much do they really care? They're just like, just chill. I always called Meg lax, bro, with how she kind of carried herself. But, I had to answer that question a lot about how much do they care? Like, well, you get to know them, you find that out pretty quickly. They're
I found that out about
Momo? People in the gym, in any gym that they walk in. It's just you don't see their teeth aren't clenched and they're not foaming at the mouth and they're not pulling their hair out and punching people in the face. But they're two of the most competitive people in any gym that you walk in.
Yeah, and I figured that out about Momo because I can't remember if it was the AAU season right after that season that year, or if it was the spring of 19. But she was playing in, I think it was in the gym rat for I-90 Elite. And I got to see her play a couple of games for I-90 Elite. I was like, oh, okay. Like I knew she was talented, but then when I saw her playing those games, I was like, all right, I get it now. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's, so sometimes it's weird. It's like you could be the same person. You can be, let me rephrase that. You can be, there can be two different sides of your competitive nature within the same body. Just a
Mhm.
matter of what atmosphere you find them in to see which one comes out. Uh, and yeah, Momo, you know, the not quite so chill side would occasionally come out when she was playing for Elite, and it was good to see, to know that, to see that. So
Yeah, and those are people like you get to know them, and there's the Phillips twins were like that
yep.
around here, and there's those are the first ones that come to mind, but there have been several others around here that are very much that that even keeled nature of like if you don't know them and you're just a kind of third party watching them, you only get to see what's in front of you from the fourth row on the basketball court, and everything is so level and even keeled and smooth. um that's the occasionally those kids, their competitive spirit and their competitive nature might get questioned. um but those are some of the most competitive kids, the ones that we brought up. Those are some of the most competitive kids that I've come across. Like I would go to battle with them.
Well, man, that wraps up this week's catch up between the two of us. Great stuff as always, Jeff. I appreciate you. Safe travels, and we'll do again next week. How's that sound?
Works for me. I will not a whole lot of local stuff for me, but I'll be following. I think the only two that I have this week are locally are AP Shaker Tuesday, Stillwater Greenwich Thursday. Besides that, I'm in, Monday today is a Section 4 day for me. Wednesday is probably, I think, a Section 1 day. Or I might go down to Tappan Zee. And then Friday through Sunday, I'm in Scranton, PA. And I've always complained ever since I started covering that District 2 Pennsylvania that there's some quality, just on the other side of Binghamton. There's quality basketball there. The only thing that I don't like about it is the scheduling. Very difficult for somebody like me that's 3 hours away to drive there and get my time's worth, because they haven't had these opportunities of multiple games and like day long sorts of showcases and whatnot. It's just make a trip on a Wednesday for a 7:15 game and either catch a hotel and hope for a Thursday game or turn around and go home. But Kevin Clark, that runs NEPA Elite AAU out in that area and owns the Riverfront Sports facility that I use for my Scranton showcases. And I know a lot of people, a lot of locals that play AAU have probably played at Riverfront for one way, shape, or form. He put together a 3-day long girls basketball kind of extravaganza for that area, where it's, for the most part, it's a team from District 2, like that area, against a team from out of the region. Like Friday night, North Pocono from their Shenango Forks, who we talked about earlier, is going down to play them on Friday. So most of it is like that, District 2 against non-District 2. There's only a couple games that are just total non-District 2, but one of them features somebody you got familiar with last year, and Coach Buckley and Albertus Magnus. So should be a fun weekend, but I will stay on top of there's enough going on in Section 2 to stay on top of over the course of the week. So might not be around all that much, but I'll stay.
I'll send your well wishes to Rob from CNS for you.
Yes, please do.
Absolutely.
Please do, my guy.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thanks, Vic. Thanks again. And
And,
we'll do it
and
again next week.
maybe I shouldn't even say this on the podcast, but and as assistant coach Bill O'Keefe, that we occasionally have poke fun with and call Bob O'Keefe, because when they won the state championship, when the banner came in, they put the wrong name on there and they said Coach Bob O'Keefe instead of Coach Bill O'Keefe.
Ruh-roh. Uh-oh. Oh, boy. Ah, jeez.
You know,
It happens.
good people.
All right, Jeff. We'll catch up next week. All right, man?
Yes, sir.